Hey guys, tonight we begin with something wet, feathery, and surprisingly strategic. You are standing ankle deep in warm, silty water. The morning mist clings to your skin like a whisper, and out in the early hush of dawn, you hear it quack, quack, quack. Not a cacophony, just the steady, measured call of ducks on a mission. Their silhouettes slide across the flooded fields like tiny, determined boats, rippling reflections in the pale pink light. You shift your foot and feel the cool mud squish between your toes. You're not a warrior, you're a rice farmer. And today your army doesn't carry swords, they waddle. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? What time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. I always find it fascinating to see who's joining from across the globe. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward slowly through the paddies. The water is warm, but the air still clings to the last cool gasp of night. In the distance, the faint shape of a small village rises, low thatched roofs, stone footpaths worn smooth by centuries of muddy feet, and duck pens near every home. The villagers have already begun their day, and their quacking companions are being rounded up like clockwork. The thing is, this isn't a modern scene. You're in 13th century Zhejiang. And here ducks aren't just livestock, they're colleagues in this slow, rhythmic world. Everything depends on timing, the planting, the flooding, the harvesting, and the ducks. Trained not just to survive, but to serve. They are released in shifts, herded into paddies with astonishing coordination. They don't eat the rice. They don't trample the stalks. At least not if they're well trained. No, these ducks have a taste for something far less noble: weeds, snails, and all the creepy crawlies that would otherwise munch their way through your hard-earned harvest. You glance at one particularly plump duck gliding near your shin. She dips her beak into the water, comes up with a wriggling aquatic snail, and gulps it down in a single slippery motion. You nod approvingly. She's doing her job. You probably won't survive this farming life unless you get your ducks in a row. Literally. But the strange thing, no one taught you about this in school. When people think of ancient China, they picture emperors, jade dragons, silk scrolls, and fireworks, not ducks on patrol. Yet historians now consider this method, rice duck integrated farming, as one of the most quietly revolutionary ecological practices in pre-modern history. Here's a mainstream fact to wade through. Rice has been grown in China for over 7,000 years. That's right, millennia of experimentation, backbreaking labor, and every now and then unexpected brilliance. And somewhere along the way, some long-forgotten farmer looked at a duck and thought, you might be useful. No one can quite agree on when this began. Some say during the Tang Dynasty, others swear it was Song. Historians still argue whether rice duck farming was a brilliant flash of local innovation or a slow, accidental evolution over generations. Regardless, by the time you arrive in this field water, to your knees sun creeping higher over the hills, it's already an established practice. The farmer beside you is back hunched from years of work, conical hat shielding his weathered face, leans on his stick and smiles as the ducks disperse into the field like seasoned workers reporting for duty. He whistles softly. Not for you, but for them. The sound is short, precise, a signal. The ducks respond, turning gently toward a new row. You watch a little hypnotized. There's something strangely elegant about it all. a water ballet of utility. They're not just eating, they're selecting. You wonder how they know what to avoid. Surely a duck doesn't know what rice looks like. Turns out it's more complicated than that. Ducklings raised from birth in the presence of rice learn by experience. They're conditioned, rewarded, nudged, sometimes gently corrected. It's not unlike dog training, except your trainees are wet, opinionated, and tend to poop mid-lesson. Still, you can't argue with the results. And speaking of duck droppings, yes, we're going there. They're not a problem. They're fertilizer. Think about it as these ducks roam the paddies. They're fertilizing the fields, naturally improving soil health without you lifting a finger. The whole system, rice ducks water, is a closed loop. Sustainable long before we even had that word. You pause to rub your eye, the humidity making your lashes stick. The farmer beside you chuckles. He tells you in an accent thick with local dialect that his grandfather believed ducks could sense bad luck in a field. If they refused to enter, he'd replant the whole thing. Superstition, but after watching them work, you kind of get it. Another duck paddles by, sneezing a little plume of water from her nostrils. She looks you dead in the eye. You blink. She waddles off. There's no doubt about it, you're a guest here. The ducks, they're the professionals. And as the sun stretches higher, casting long reflections across the water, you find yourself falling into the rhythm of it. Splash, quack, squelch, repeat. You're not just watching ancient agriculture. You're part of it now. And the deeper you go, the more you realize you'll never look at a duck the same way again. You lean into the day now, lulled by the slow repetition of the work and the gentle soundscape of 1,000 webbed feet swishing through shallow water. The sun climbs, but not urgently. It's filtered through a faint veil of clouds, and the whole world seems washed in that soft gray blue that makes time feel slower, quieter, older. Behind you, someone calls out, and you turn to see another group of ducks being released from a bamboo gate. They tumble out like children late for school, splashing, wobbling one, slipping in the mud, and correcting with a flustered wing flap. But within moments, they straighten their lines and begin the practiced, purposeful zigzag that sends them through the rice field in neat columns. It's comical, but also a little magical. You glance down at the rice plants around your knees, bright green blades emerging from the water like miniature forests. These are only a few weeks old, fragile but determined. And in these early days, the threat isn't the weather, it's the weeds. Fast-growing invaders that could crowd the rice, steal its nutrients, choke out its roots. If they take hold now, it's over. And you, the hypothetical ancient Chinese farmer, in your thoroughly soaked linen trousers, are not in the mood to lose a season to some water-loving grass. That's where the ducks come in. The logic is beautifully simple. Ducks eat weeds, but not rice. At least if everything goes to plan. You squint out across the paddies again, watching their little beaks dip and probe the surface, picking out unwanted sprouts, biting down hard on tender shoots of sedge and barnyard grass. They eat mosquito larvae too, snails, anything squirmy. All the villains of the rice world dispatched by waddling justice. And here's the astonishing part. Rice fields actually need this, not just for convenience, but for survival. You see, these flooded paddies aren't like dry farmland. You can't just roll a cart through here with a hoe and a prayer. You can't spray modern herbicides. At least not if you're a 13th century villager whose biggest technology is a bamboo rake. No, weeding a rice field by hand is excruciating. back-bent legs, submerged eyes, scanning the endless green, hour after hour, pulling one tiny weed at a time. Every season, every year, every generation, until the ducks. You notice an older woman in a nearby field, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, nodding approvingly at her birds. Her family's ducks move like a silk ribbon through the water, never straying from their formation. You wave at her. She waves back proud. And she should be, those ducks are killing it out there. Now, not to burst the blissful bubble, but this system isn't entirely foolproof. Sometimes ducks do make mistakes. They're not botanists after all. Some days, a young, overeager duck might yank up a rice sprout just to see what it tastes like. You wince just imagining it, weeks of careful planting undone by one curious nibble. But mostly they get it right, because rice and ducks evolved alongside farmers, and the farmers paid very close attention. Mainstream fact incoming: some rice cultivars, yes, specific types, are selected not just for flavor or hardiness, but for compatibility with duck behavior. For example, varieties with tougher stems or more upright growth reduce the odds of accidental duck destruction. It's not just farming, it's matchmaking. Still, historians remain split on how this harmony came to be. Did early farmers teach ducks to avoid rice? Or did they just select ducks that didn't mess up too much? Some argue the process was conscious. Others claim it was slow generational filtering. Historians still argue whether this method spread through written knowledge or quiet oral tradition passed from village to village, like a particularly good dumpling recipe. And speaking of recipes, you catch a familiar smell drifting on the breeze. Lunch is being prepared nearby. Likely rice, maybe a bit of pickled mustard greens, possibly, though it's a bit taboo, a duck egg. Not every duck lives a long life after all. Farming is nothing if not practical. You adjust your straw hat and look out once more across the shimmering grid of water. You'd expected the ducks to be wild, chaotic, impossible to manage. But now you see them more like low-maintenance colleagues. They don't complain. They work long hours. They fertilize on the go. And they do it all for free, assuming you count snails and weeds as wages. But what really stays with you, what makes you pause mid-step, is the realization that this isn't some forgotten relic of peasant life. This is engineering, ecology, sustainability with feathers. Back home, you think of farming as a battle. Crops versus pests, humans versus nature. Here it's more like choreography. The ducks aren't enemies of the field, they're part of the system. And that tiny shift in thinking might be what kept these fields green for centuries without a single drop of pesticide. As the sun leans toward noon, the ducks start to slow down. They've eaten their fill, and now they're just poking around like bored interns on a Friday. You hear a whistle from the far end of the field, and the whole flock begins its slow, dignified exit, quack, quack, quacking back toward the holding pens. You follow at a distance, trying not to laugh at the occasional tail wiggle or splashy hop. Behind you, the rice plants sway gently free of invaders stretching up to meet the sky. You didn't fight a battle today. You let the ducks win it for you. You're back in the field now, leaning on a crooked bamboo staff like the rest of them eyes, following the duck patrol's morning route. They've been gone for a bit, cooling off in a shaded pen, splashing around in communal water troughs, pecking curiously at each other's feathers like gossiping co-workers at the break room sink. But now they're returning, and you're beginning to understand the rhythm of it all. This isn't chaos, this is scheduling. The second shift waddles in with purpose heads, low eyes sharp. These ducks mean business. And as you watch, you finally see it, the pattern. They aren't just wandering aimlessly. They're working the field in wide looping zigzags, each loop overlapping slightly with the last. They cover every square foot of flooded ground, scanning for weeds, pests, and anything else unfortunate enough to wriggle. You wade a few steps forward and peer into the water. It's clearer than you expected. Not crystal, of course, it's still a murky blend of soil and silt, but the duck patrol has done their job. No floating weeds, no slimy green patches, just neat rows of bright green rice, swaying ever so slightly like underwater ribbons. You pause, mesmerized again, and then you remember the question that brought you here. How do the ducks know? How can they tell rice apart from everything else? The answer, as it turns out, is part science, part mystery, and part pure duck instinct. Most ducks don't arrive in the world knowing anything about rice. That's where their human trainers come in. From the moment the ducklings hatch, fluffy, squeaky, barely bigger than your palm, they begin their education. They're fed near rice plants, exposed to flooded fields, watched carefully. The ones who behave well, meaning they nibble weeds but leave rice alone, get more freedom. The troublemakers are herded out, separated, and either trained again or, let's say, redirected to other culinary purposes. You kneel beside a farmer who's cradling a juvenile duck in his lap, murmuring gently. The duck is nervous but curious, tilting its head back and forth as the farmer opens his hand to show it a stalk of barnyard grass. The duck nibbles. Good. Then a rice seedling. The duck pauses, then ignores it. Even better. This one, you're told, is a quick learner. So here's your mainstream historical fact of the moment. Chinese agricultural texts from the Ming Dynasty, yes, the same Ming Dynasty, famous for blue and white porcelain, mention rice duck, farming with matter-of-fact practicality. To them, it wasn't quaint or odd. It was just what worked. Still, historians argue whether the training methods were standardized across regions or varied wildly from village to village. Some scholars believe there were even duck herders who specialized in this craft and traveled field to field with their own flocks, like freelance pest control, but with more feathers and fewer invoices. You sit back on your heels and watch the next group of ducklings splash their way into a shallower paddy. They're awkward, bumping into each other and occasionally stepping on their own oversized feet. But give it a few weeks, and they'll be indistinguishable from the veteran weeders ahead of them. The training process relies on repetition and surprisingly sound. Here's where it gets fascinating and just a little bizarre. You notice the farmer beside you has a string of tiny bells hanging from his waist. Not decorative, functional. When he jingles them, the ducks change direction. He claps twice and they pause. He whistles one long note, then two short, and they retreat to the shallows. It's like watching a feathered dance troupe choreographed by sound alone. Some farmers even use drums, small handheld wooden ones with low muffled thumps. Not loud, not startling, just rhythmic. The ducks raised with these cues from their earliest days associate each sound with a task. Left, right, stop, go. And perhaps most importantly, no rice. You imagine what this would look like in a PowerPoint presentation? Slide one Pavlov, but with ducks. You chuckle quietly and then immediately stop when a duck gives you a judgmental side eye. Fair enough. Quirky tidbit time. In some regions, ducks were given little cloth tags tied to their legs, identification for which field or family they belonged to. Farmers took pride in their ducks, and even competitions sprang up at local markets to showcase particularly well-trained flocks. Picture a rural talent show, but instead of juggling or singing, the stars are synchronized weeders. The more you watch, the more you realize how intricate this relationship is. It's not just about convenience, it's about respect. The farmers don't yell, they don't rush, they guide. And the ducks respond not because they're forced, but because they've been raised in partnership with the field. Still, not everything is serene. A shout goes up from another row. A young duck has made a mistake. The farmer sighs, sloshes over, and gently redirects the culprit with the end of a long stick. No punishment, just correction. The duck looks sheepish, or as sheepish as a duck can look. You note the incident mentally. Even in a finely tuned system, there's always margin for error. As the day stretches on the sun, now reflecting off the water like melted glass, the patties take on a dreamlike shimmer. You close your eyes for a moment and just listen. The water, the clucks and quacks, the distant hum of a market square opening behind the village wall. It all blends into a kind of rural symphony, and through it all the ducks keep working, one paddock at a time, one weed at a time, no plows, no sprays, just beaks, feet, and a language older than writing. And in this quiet corner of the past, that's more than enough. The sun is climbing, and with it, the heat begins to thicken like soup left too long on the fire. The ducks, undeterred, are still out there, methodical, patient, unfussy. You squint toward the far edge of the field where an elderly farmer leans against a wooden fence post, arms folded, watching his flock with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose back no longer hurts because he no longer spends 14 hours stooped over yanking weeds by hand. You walk toward him slow and deliberate each step, releasing a soft squelch from the mud. He nods at you, tips his hat slightly, then turns his eyes back to the water. Used to break your spine, this kind of work, he murmurs, without looking your way. Until the ducks, you smile, unsure if you should reply. He doesn't seem to expect one. You follow his gaze out across the flooded plots. There, a fresh group of ducks has taken to the shallower rows, smaller birds, perhaps only a few months old, learning to weed with cautious pecks and many, many wrong guesses. One enthusiastically bites a leaf of rice, realizes its mistake too late, and coughs up a feathery indignation. The farmer lets out a dry chuckle. There's no shouting, no chasing, just patient watching and gentle correction. You realize slowly that this isn't some passive benefit of having ducks. This is a relationship carefully cultivated, generational mutual. The ducks weed and fertilize. In return, they're protected, trained, even cherished. Now here's a piece of mainstream history that doesn't make it into textbooks often. In parts of southern China during the Yuan dynasty, rice duck farming wasn't just common, it was considered ideal. Entire villages coordinated duck schedules to ensure that flocks rotated through paddies at just the right growth stages. Duck management was a respected form of agricultural knowledge, passed on the same way you'd pass on heirloom tools or a recipe for winter pickles. And while ancient Chinese scholars were writing poetry about plum blossoms and the impermanence of life, some were also scribbling notes on optimal duck release intervals and ideal paddock depth for pest control. Romance, yes, but also practicality. You reach the edge of the field and sit on a dry patch of bamboo matting. A bowl of cool barley tea is handed to you without a word. You sip, grateful. The farmer beside you waves a hand across the landscape. My father used to do this with geese, he says. But the geese were idiots. Ducks are cleverer. You look up curious. Geese. He shrugs. They trample too much, bite too hard, and they scream at everything. Ducks know when to be quiet. You glance toward the fields again. Indeed, aside from the occasional low muttering of quacks and splashes, the scene is hushed. Ducks patrol the water silently, their movements more subtle. than you ever imagined from such ridiculous-looking animals. Now here's your quirky tidbit of the day. In certain regions, ducks were even used as status indicators. A well-trained duck flock wasn't just efficient, it was fashionable. Farmers with particularly obedient birds earned nicknames. Some were called duck whisperers, others more theatrically Waterfield magicians. There are recorded anecdotes from the Ming period where wealthy landowners would invite guests over just to watch their ducks in action. Think of it as ancient duck Netflix, but with snacks and folding fans. Of course, not everyone appreciated the artistry. Historians still argue whether government officials truly supported rice duck integration or merely tolerated it. Some imperial edicts praised its efficiency. Others worried that relying on ducks was lazy, fearing it would erode the virtuous toil expected of farmers. One overly serious magistrate even wrote a treatise warning that ducks make men slothful and disobedient. You sip your barley tea again and squint into the distance. Slothful, really. Because from where you're sitting, it looks like cooperation, not laziness. You watch as a duck dips its head, grabs a squirming snail, and flicks it expertly into its beak. That's not idleness. That's ecological genius feathered and waddling. The old farmer beside you grins, suddenly mischief in his eyes. There's a legend, he says, about a duck that got so good at weeding it was taken to the emperor's court. You raise your eyebrows. A royal duck? He nods sagely. It refused to eat palace weeds. Too spoiled by village mud, the emperor was furious. You both laugh softly, respectfully. The ducks might hear after all. You finish your tea and stand again, stretching limbs, gone stiff from stillness. The heat is deeper now, pressing into your skin like wet cloth. In the fields, the ducks are slowing their pace, content and full. A few climb the banks and flop onto dry patches to nap bellies bulging slightly from a morning of snacking. The rice, meanwhile, stands taller. You look down at the plants near your feet. Just days ago, these fragile green stalks were struggling against weeds and insects. Now they sway gently in the breeze, clearer space. Around each base, their roots soaking up sunlight and duck droppings with equal joy. You feel something odd, a little pride. Not for yourself, really. You didn't do the work. But you were here. You saw it. The elegance of it. The slow, steady miracle of a duck and a field in harmony. One farmer, a dozen birds, a paddy of rice, and history quacking softly just below the surface. You wake from a short doze beneath the shade of a waxberry tree, blinking slowly as dragonflies skim low across the water's surface. The field is quieter now. The ducks have retreated to their pens, some dozing in heaps like disheveled pillows, others still shaking water from their wings with the grace of half-drunk dancers. The morning bustle has faded into that slow midday lull where even the breeze seems to yawn. But not everyone is idle. You hear them before you see them soft. Whistles, the scrape of sandals against wet wood, and the low murmurs of command. A small group of farmers has gathered by the edge of the duck pen. They're not carrying tools, they're carrying ducklings. You move closer, careful not to startle the little ones. They're bright yellow and awkward, waddling erratically as the farmers place them gently into a narrow training enclosure, a shallow channel of water bordered by woven bamboo fences. This is no field. It's a classroom. Welcome to duck kindergarten. The training pen is about waist-high, half filled with water and lined with clumps of common weeds and rice, planted in tidy rows for practice. Here, ducklings are introduced to their life's work in bite-sized portions. First they're allowed to explore, then they're guided. Each misstep a nibbled rice stalk, a stomped seedling is met with a sharp sound, or a redirecting stick, never cruel, always deliberate. You squat beside one of the handlers, a young man no older than 20, who holds a bundle of green shoots in one hand and a pouch of duck feed in the other. With a short whistle and a flick of his wrist, he draws the attention of half a dozen ducklings, their heads bobbing like synchronized swimmers. You feed them. After they pick the right plant, he says. They remember. You nod. And the ones who don't, he shrugs. They become dinner. Harsh, but fair. This is not a sentimental world. It is deeply practical. Yet there's an undeniable tenderness in the way the young man reaches down to scratch the neck of a bold little duck that just pushed its way past the others, pecked the right weed, and turned as if to ask, "Did I do it?" He grins. That one's going to be trouble. You stay and watch the training for a while, observing how the farmers use a combination of body language, sound, and timing to teach the ducklings. There's a rhythm to it, a kind of choreography. One woman taps her stick 3 times, points at a clump of floating weeds, and the ducklings move toward it like water flowing downhill. Mainstream fact-time Chinese records as early as the Song dynasty describe animal training with remarkable detail, not just dogs and horses, but birds, pigs, even fish. The idea of behavioral conditioning wasn't abstract. It was lived, refined through repetition and observation over generations. In duck farming, this became an art. Still, historians are divided on just how formalized this process was. Some believe families kept careful training logs, even passed down duck rearing manuals. Others argue it was oral, a matter of imitation and instinct, where sons learned by watching fathers, and daughters taught ducklings the same way they taught babies to walk. Historians still argue whether rice duck farming developed through systematic science or slow accumulation of craft. But as you watch a 6-year-old boy kneel beside his grandmother and copy her every movement, same whistle, same scoop of duck feed, you begin to suspect it was both. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some old folk tales, a duck that never weeds was a metaphor for uselessness. One story tells of a boy who failed his exams and was scolded with the phrase, "Even a duck finds work in the field." Ducks, in other words, had become the baseline for productivity. If you weren't pulling your weight, you weren't even duck-worthy. You follow the group as they lead the trained ducklings, now damp and proud, out of the pen and toward their first real field. It's not the main paddies, but a smaller section reserved for training. Rice planted, sparsely weeds. Encouraged for practice, water depth adjusted carefully. The ducklings hesitate at the edge. It's deeper than they're used to. One slides and flaps furiously, then calms. The rest follow, chirping nervously, then settling into the work. The young man beside you watches with a calm intensity. This is the hard part, he says. The first day out, some freeze, some chase shadows, but some just know. You watch as one particularly bold duckling darts toward a clump of sedge pecks once, twice, and yanks it free. The handler gives a low whistle of approval. It beams at least as much as a duckling can beam. And suddenly you're aware of how much is riding on these birds. This isn't just about rice yields or soil health. It's about identity. A family's ducks reflect their discipline, their patience, their skill. A bad flock means ridicule. A good one brings pride and food security. You take a final look at the training field As the ducklings begin to spread out, each one testing the water, nibbling curiously, learning to become more than just a bird, learning to become a partner in farming. And you standing at the edge in your now thoroughly soaked sandals feel something you didn't expect: admiration, not just for the people, but for the ducks themselves. They're not machines, they're not tools, they're part of a living system, messy, unpredictable, but enduring. You tip your straw hat to the field. One duckling turns to look at you. You're not sure, but you think it winks. You've moved now to a slightly drier patch near the edge of the field, sitting beside a pile of bundled reeds, while your soaked trousers cling to your calves like stubborn seaweed. From here, you get a broader view, not just of one field or one flock, but the whole duck operation. And it hits you, this is no casual farm chore. This is logistics. Because training ducks isn't just about raising them right, it's about directing them right. And you're about to witness the surprisingly complex art of duck herding. It starts as many strange and impressive things do with a man and a stick. He's older, lean as a bamboo pole, and he carries himself like he's seen 1,000 mornings just like this one. In his right hand, he holds a staff capped with fabric strips. In his left, a small clay whistle. At first glance, you might think he's a shepherd. And in a way, he has just swapped out wool for feathers and grassland for ankle-deep water. You watch as he moves toward the pen. A low whistle. The ducks stir, another slightly sharper. They begin to waddle forward like commuters who've just heard the subway arrive. He walks slowly, calmly, guiding, with gestures so subtle you almost miss them. A raised hand here, a shifted foot there. And the ducks, dozens of them, move like a single thought, gliding toward the open paddy. You follow behind, half expecting chaos. But none comes. They enter the water in smooth rows, fanning out across the field, with that signature ducky grace, somewhere between ballet and stubborn lunchtime scramble. It's not just whistling and sticks, though. Herding ducks, as you soon learn, also requires deep awareness of timing and space. Release them too early and they panic. Too late and they get lazy. Too few and the weeds win. Too many and they trample the rice. You stand beside the herder now, ankle deep again, watching his eyes scan the ducks, like a general surveying troops. He murmurs numbers under his breath. 20 in this row, 15 to the left, 5 stragglers, near the drainage ditch. They spread too far, he mutters, and with a swift twist of his staff, he dips the end into the water and flicks it gently. The sound, a small splash, is enough. The stray ducks pivot and rejoin the group. You glance at him. How do they know what to do? He smiles. Same as you know when to move in a crowd. You look, you feel, you follow. He's not wrong. Watching the ducks is like watching a school of fish, or maybe a very well-behaved kindergarten class on a field trip. They respond not only to commands, but to each other. A single duck changing course sends a ripple through the flock, nudging the rest to adjust. The trick, it seems, isn't forcing them, it's giving them the right space to do what they're already inclined to do. Mainstream historical fact time, ancient agricultural guides from the Southern Song period, include specific passages on animal movement. Not just where to place ducks, but how to move them. One text compares duck herding to guiding water down a hill. With gentle hands and open paths, the stream finds its way. Poetic, yes. Practical, also yes. Still, historians still argue whether these texts were truly reflective of common practice or more idealized instructions written by scholar officials who hadn't touched a duck in their lives. The farmer beside you would probably laugh at that idea. His eyes say he trusts instinct over ink. Here comes your quirky fact of the day. Some duck herders, especially in coastal provinces, carried tiny gongs strapped to their belts. Not loud ones, soft, rhythmic chimes that signaled direction changes or water depth. It was said that ducks trained with gongs would stop in place the moment the sound ceased, as if frozen by some invisible conductor, like the world's slowest but most obedient orchestra. And indeed you watch as the man beside you taps his stick twice on the surface of the water, soft, deliberate. The ducks ahead pause. Another tap, and they turn, rotating neatly like boats in a canal. It's mesmerizing, but it's not always perfect. One duck veers off course, distracted by a butterfly. Another tries to steal a snail from its neighbor, leading to a brief chase and splashy argument. The herder sighs, shakes his head. Young ones, he mutters, no discipline. You ask how long it takes to train them. 2 weeks before they're useful. 2 months before they're good. 2 years before they don't embarrass you. You nod solemnly. 2 years sounds about right for ducks or people. You help guide them now, mimicking his movements. Gentle gestures, small whistles, always from the side, never from behind. It's not easy. The ducks know him. They only tolerate you. One gives you a long look before ignoring your signal entirely and continuing to chase a floating leaf. You try not to take it personally. As the sun dips a little lower, the herding session draws to a close. The ducks are guided back to their pen with no more fuss than when they started. They file in, some stopping to shake their feathers dry, others flopping straight into the hay to nap. The herder lowers his staff and breathes a long, satisfied breath. Not bad, he says. You didn't lose any. You feel absurdly proud, even though you know you contributed very little. You glance back at the field. The water glows gold, now reflecting the sky in gentle ripples. The rice stands unharmed. The weeds are gone. And all because of a few dozen ducks and a man who speaks their language without ever raising his voice. The evening light has softened to a pale amber as you trail behind the duck herder toward a small thatched structure near the village edge. It's a humble pen, no more than wooden posts lashed together with rope and patched with woven reeds, but inside it's warm, busy, and full of life. This, you're told, is the nursery. You step inside and are immediately met by the unmistakable scent of straw feathers and wet wood. The floor is layered with soft hay, and nestled within it are ducklings, dozens of them, some asleep, some chirping, some chewing on each other's feathers, as if to prove a point. They wobble, they flop, they occasionally squeak in their sleep. You're overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of tiny feet. This, it turns out, is where everything begins. The herder hands you a small basket. Inside it, still damp from the shell, is a single duckling blinking slowly. New this morning, he says. This one will be working the field in 2 months. You look down at the little thing and try to imagine it gliding through flooded fields, slurping up snails, like a seasoned pro. Right now it can barely stand. But if today has taught you anything, it's that ducks grow fast and smarter than you'd expect. There's a feeding trough along the back wall filled with a soft mash made from rice bran crushed snails and greens. You help ladle some into smaller trays, which the ducklings descend upon like tiny quacking locusts. One tries to climb into the tray entirely. Another sneezes and falls over backwards. As you work, the herder explains the next step: socialization. These ducklings won't be trained alone. They'll be raised together in small groups, mini flocks, that stay intact even when they're released into the paddies. Ducks, he tells you, learn faster in teams. One curious duckling can teach 5 others what to avoid or what to bite. They observe, mimic, and compete. It's not just learning. It's duck peer pressure. Mainstream fact time. By the late Ming Dynasty, some farming manuals specified flock sizes between 20 and 50 ducks per handler, depending on the terrain. Anything more became unwieldy. Anything less inefficient, like managing an office team. Only your employees occasionally poop on your sandals. You settle into a corner of the pen, watching as a group of slightly older ducklings practice short waddles between markers on the floor. Their trainer, a wiry boy, barely older than they are, stands nearby with a whistle in his mouth and a pouch of treats at his hip. He watches closely, noting which ones turn when he whistles, which ones hesitate, and which ones wander off in search of something to chew. Training ducks, you realize, isn't just about correcting mistakes. It's about rewarding precision. Every right movement is met with something positive: a sound, a treat, a scratch behind the neck. It's operant conditioning with feathers, and it's working. You catch a glimpse of a hand-painted board near the entrance, a crude chart tracking duckling progress. Each mark represents a behavioral milestone: turns correctly, stops. On signal, ignores rice. It looks like a preschool sticker chart. You're absurdly charmed, the quirky tidbit this time. In some regions, ducklings were given names based on personality traits. The best weeders were called things like snail slayer or rice friend. The lazy ones, featherhead. Waddles. One recorded name from a 17th century account was simply No. Presumably that duck caused a lot of sighing. Outside the pen, the air is cooling. The heat of the day has given way to that quiet, golden hush that precedes twilight. Smoke begins curling from chimneys as cooking fires are lit. The smell of soy, garlic, and ginger drifts through the village. A duck nearby lets out a honk, indignant, as another tries to steal its bedding. The herder gestures to the older ducks beyond the pen, those currently resting before tomorrow's patrol. They all start here, he says softly. Even the best. You find yourself watching one particular duck, older, calm, perched on a flat stone with eyes half closed in contentment. Its feathers are neat, its belly full, and you're told it's one of the most efficient weeders in the region. No rice harmed under its watch. It wasn't born knowing that. It was taught. Historians still argue whether duck intelligence is innate or trained, whether some flocks just had it or whether the skills were entirely shaped by the farmer's techniques. There are anecdotes, sure, a legendary duck that once corrected another midfield, or stories of birds refusing to enter cursed paddies. But no one really knows where instinct ends and training begins. You return the baby duckling to its hay-lined corner and watch as it promptly sits down and peeps once before falling asleep. It doesn't know yet what's ahead: the flooded fields, the long days, the reward whistles, and near misses the duck line drills, and eventually the pride of work done well. You lean back, straw poking through your tunic, and close your eyes for just a moment. Outside, the rice fields stretch on. The weeds, those ever-hungry invaders, will come back. They always do. But now you know exactly who's coming for them. It's just past dawn, and you're back at the edge of the paddies with a fresh breeze at your back and a thin fog rising from the water like steam from a sleepy kettle. Today you're following a new flock, older than yesterday's ducklings, younger than the seasoned veterans. These are the trainees, feathered apprentices in the middle of their education. And if you think this is going to be an easy shift, think again. You soon learn that duck herding is only half the challenge. The other half is duck discipline. The sun filters gently through the haze, casting the field in a soft gold sheen. You step forward onto the narrow walking berm, trying to keep your balance. As the flock waddles along beside you, they're lively, enthusiastic, and utterly disorganized. One of them veers off toward a puddle of stagnant water and immediately begins splashing like it's on summer vacation. Two more follow because apparently puddles are contagious. Your handler for the day, a stern woman with a commanding whistle and a scarred walking stick, sighs deeply. Third time this week she mutters, before striding forward to redirect the rogue splashers with a sharp clap and a low whistle. Duck herding isn't just about pushing birds around, it's about reading the flock. Knowing when a duck is distracted, when it's about to bolt, when it's on the edge of misbehavior, and occasionally when one is just plain rebellious. You watch as a brown-spotted juvenile eyes a rice clump too closely. It waddles up, bends its neck, opens its bill, and then pauses as if remembering something it shouldn't. It slowly turns and pecks a snail instead. You exhale with relief. There's hope for that one, the handler says, chewing a stalk of sweetgrass. You're in the thick of it now, part of the duck patrol. Every few minutes the handler calls out commands, whistles, clicks, the occasional chanted phrase in a dialect you don't quite understand. The ducks respond like students halfway through semester, mostly cooperative, occasionally distracted, sometimes passive-aggressive. It's a test of attention. For them, for you. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this round. During the Qing dynasty, rice duck farming was so well established in some southern regions that farming communities developed annual duck reviews, days where the most promising flocks were shown off, judged, and even bet on. The best trained ducks weren't just useful, they were famous. Like feathered celebrities of the rural world, and just like any stars in training, these birds have their quirks. As the day warms, you learn what every duck handler eventually learns. Some ducks are just stubborn. One refuses to follow the others, instead doing elaborate spins in the water as if auditioning for a role in Swan Lake. Another seems to think rice paddies are racetracks, darting down rows at full speed with no apparent goal. It skids, crashes flaps wildly, and falls into a ditch. You expect the handler to be annoyed. Instead, she snorts. That one's got wind in its feet, she says, as if this explains everything. And perhaps it does. Because out here ducks are individuals. They have personalities, rhythms, habits. And those quirks, far from being annoying, are part of what makes them trainable. Predictable unpredictability. Quirky tidbit of the day. There are duck horoscopes. No, really. In some villages, farmers believed duck behavior was influenced by the phase of the moon under which they hatched. New moon ducks were said to be bold but foolish. Full moon ducks, calm, steady, and a bit lazy. If you want a good weeder, the handler says, pray for a waxing crescent. You squint at the sky as if it might help. The training session continues. You're now ankle deep in the far side of the field, helping steer the flock through a patch of water with particularly stubborn algae growth. This is the real test, less weeds, more slop. And the ducks need to dig for their meal. This is where discipline shines. The better trained ducks go to work immediately, heads bobbing under the surface in a rhythmic, satisfying pattern. The others hesitate, One seems concerned about its reflection, another pecks at a floating leaf with deep suspicion. It's chaos, but it's productive chaos. Slowly, the algae thins. The ducks grow bolder, they're learning even here how to prioritize weed. First snack, second mischief later. You trudge alongside them, your arms sore from holding your balance on the narrow berms. A particularly confident duck swims beside you for several minutes, occasionally nudging your leg with its beak, as if checking on your performance. Yes, you mutter, I'm still upright. Behind you, the handler laughs. Historians still argue whether duck herding was considered high skill or just another village task. Some old records suggest it was assigned to children and elders, the assumption being that it required patience more than muscle, but others argue it took years to master, and experienced duck handlers were valued nearly as much as the farmers themselves. After today, you're inclined to side with the latter. By the time the sun reaches its peak, the ducks are herded back to their pens, slightly muddier, slightly more trained, and absolutely louder. You collapse onto a shaded bench beside a trough of water, dunking your hands into the coolness with a groan of relief. The handler sits beside you, stretching her legs. They're getting better, she says. You can see it? You nod. Still a few wild cards. She smirks. Always. That's what keeps it interesting. You look out at the empty field, shimmering in the midday heat. The weeds are fewer. The water is clearer. The rice seems taller, prouder somehow. And you, duck trainee turned semi-functional assistant, are oddly proud too. Because even if they don't listen half the time, even if they bite your ankles or steal each other's feathers, the ducks are doing something remarkable. They're turning a flooded, weedy mess into a thriving field. Not with brute force, but with consistency, rhythm, routine, a few flaps, a few beeps, a few mistakes, sure, but mostly progress. You return to the fields the next morning under a light drizzle. Not a soaking rain, just that quiet, persistent mist that clings to your sleeves and drips from the brim of your straw hat. The world feels muffled. The ducks, however, are unbothered. They love this weather. Cooler water, softer ground, and fewer humans stomping around and yelling things. Today the patties are theirs. You slosh through the shallow rows and stop to watch a flock at work. They're veterans, you're told. Mature, steady, and deeply uninterested in drama. You can see it in the way they move, focused, deliberate, every head dipping in near unison as they patrol the field like tiny feathered custodians. And here in this soft gray morning, it hits you. This system has been running for centuries, longer than any one dynasty, longer than most written records, and yet it's still happening. Rice and ducks, ducks and rice, a partnership so elegant it almost feels accidental, but it wasn't. You squint into the mist and imagine time peeling backward like the layers of an old scroll. Centuries fade, styles change, empires rise and crumble, but in these fields the rhythm holds, the splashing, the weeding, the quiet authority of a duck herder's whistle. Mainstream historical fact-integrated rice duck farming dates back at least 1,000 years, though its origins are still debated. In southern China, particularly regions like Zhejiang and Fujian, there are records of duck-assisted weeding during the Song dynasty. Yet it's likely the practice is even older, passed down orally, long before anyone thought to put pen to parchment. Historians still argue whether the rice duck method spread via government agricultural bureaus or simply diffused through local observation. Some believe there were official training centers. Others argue it was far more organic, neighbor watching neighbor, slowly building knowledge through muddy trial and error. You wade farther in now, following a narrow berm as ducks crisscross before you. Every few meters, one pauses to shake off a clump of algae, then dives back into the work like nothing happened. They don't rush, they don't panic, they simply do. That's the heart of this method. It isn't flashy, it isn't forceful, it's steady, predictable, like water following the slope of a hill. You crouch at the field's edge and run your fingers through the shallow water. The mud is soft, dotted with tiny roots and bubbles. The rice looks vibrant, strong. You know now that it didn't get this way through chemicals or machines. It got here thanks to ducks, honest, mildly chaotic, snack-obsessed ducks. Quirky tidbit for the day. Some old farming songs included verses dedicated to ducks. Not about ducks for them, sung during herding to calm them. One 15th century lullaby roughly translates, "Little foot, little bill, eat the weeds, but leave the hill. Paddle light, paddle true, let the rice grow tall for you." It's adorable and slightly manipulative, but apparently effective. You sit beside an old woman weaving rope from dry reeds. Her hands move automatically faster than your eyes can follow. She doesn't look up, just nods toward the field. "This way's better," she says. "The chemicals are fast, yes. But the ducks remember." You blink. "Remember?" She smiles slightly. They learn the shape of the field, the smell of the water. They know when the rice is strong, when the weeds come back. Same as we do. You poison the weeds, they die. You teach the duck, it keeps learning. You look back at the flock. It's true, these ducks aren't just following instinct. They're responding to something more subtle. Repetition, familiarity, experience. The field becomes part of their memory. And every season that memory grows, you follow a small group as they approach a narrow inlet where snails tend to gather. They go straight to it, no hesitation, beaks, dipping rapidly, necks arched like little cranes. No one told them to go there today. They just know. By now you've walked through 9 fields, watched at least 5 flocks, and gotten splashed by dozens of beaks. You've seen ducklings fail and veterans succeed. You've seen farmers raise ducks like family, and ducks perform like employees of the month. And still every hour brings something new, like the fact that these fields aren't just for food, they're living records. The berm you're standing on, it's been walked for generations. The fence posts replaced dozens of times in the same exact spots. The paddies don't just grow rice, they grow time. And here's a final image for you, a single duck paddling slowly at the end of the row, alone but purposeful. Its reflection wobbles in the rippling water. Behind it, nothing but cleared space, clean rows of rice, no weeds in sight. Ahead, the last few meters of its patrol. It doesn't speed up, it doesn't slow down, it just keeps moving. Like the farmers, like the fields, like the 1,000-year thread that holds them all together. The drizzle has stopped, leaving behind a shimmer on every surface. The rice leaves glisten like jade. The muddy paths reflect the silver sky and the ducks. The ducks are in peak form. You hear them before you see them, that soft symphony of paddling feet, water flicks, and low murmurs. They're in a different section of the field today, one newly flooded and thick with weeds and pests. But today's patrol isn't just about greenery. Today they face an old enemy, the golden apple snail. You kneel by the berm, curious. You've heard whispers of this slick-shelled villain, how it clings to rice stalks, munches with astonishing speed, and multiplies like it's trying to win a population contest. And unfortunately, it's good at it. Really good. The golden apple snail isn't native to these patties. It was introduced centuries ago, some say, by accident. Others blame ambitious traders hoping to farm snails as food. Either way, once they arrived, they made themselves very, very comfortable. Rice farmers quickly realized they had a problem, a slimy, voracious, hard to eradicate problem. But not all hope was lost. Because while humans struggle with pest ducks, consider them lunch. You follow the flock into the murky field, watching as the ducks begin their methodical sweep. They know what to look for. Where weeds are soft, snails are stubborn. They cling to stalks, float along mud banks, lay eggs in vivid pink clusters that cling to stones and stems like neon graffiti. The ducks are ready. One spots a snail, paddles over, and slurp. It's gone. Another grabs two at once, shakes its head, then swallows like a small, satisfied dragon. It's efficient, brutal, and oddly elegant. No digging, no scraping, just practiced, quiet extermination. Mainstream fact time. In many parts of Asia, the golden apple snail became such a persistent threat that entire crops were lost in a matter of days. Farmers were forced to either resort to chemical snail killers, damaging both soil and water, or get creative. And that's where ducks became not just a tradition, but a tactical response. Historians still argue whether rice-duck integration became more widespread during pest booms, or whether the duck method existed long before and simply adapted. Some believe farmers retrofitted duck herding to deal with new threats. Others think the ducks were always a flexible part of the system, ready to shift roles as needed. Whatever the truth today, you're seeing a duck-led counterinsurgency in real time. You move closer, careful not to disturb the rhythm. The ducks work in loose formation, 3 abreast, then 1 behind, breaking into smaller subgroups. It's not organized like a military drill. It's more like jazz, improvised, intuitive, responsive. When one finds a snail bed, it lets out a short, sharp quack. The others take note. They're not just eliminating the snails. They're preventing the eggs from hatching. As they paddle, they disturb the surfaces where eggs are laid. Some even peck at the pink clusters, cracking them open before they can take root. It's strange to watch something so destructive. These pests become a breakfast buffet for something so charming. Your handler today is a middle-aged man with calloused hands and a duck whistle shaped like a bamboo flute. He leans on his staff, watching the field with a hawk's patience. They know the smell, he says softly. Snails have oil. Ducks smell that oil. They remember. You nod, not quite sure if he means scientifically or spiritually, but either way the ducks clearly do remember. You watch as one duck ignores a floating weed entirely to disappear for 3 seconds, then surface with a snail in its beak. Precision work, quirky tidbit of the day. There's a local tale that ducks trained on snails will refuse regular feed for days afterward, turning up their bills unless their meals wiggle. One farmer once claimed his entire flock went on hunger strike because the snails had run out. That's dedication or very spoiled poultry. You glance around the field. It's not just snails being cleared. The duck's movement stirs the water, oxygenates the soil, loosens invasive roots, and gently presses fertilizer into the mud. Every sweep is a multitasking miracle. If ducks were paid, they'd be up for several promotions by now. And then you notice something peculiar a single duck lingering behind. You watch it hover near a small clump of wild rice, hesitant. It dips its head once, twice, then backs off swimming to a different patch entirely. You point. Why didn't it eat that one? The handler smiles. That one's not ready yet. The snails under it haven't moved. Ducks know. They wait. You sit with that for a while. Ducks. Waiting. Choosing. Timing their strikes. Suddenly it's not hard to imagine a duck as a quiet strategist weighing odds, watching for the right moment. Not just a beak with feet, but a field-savvy professional. As the patrol ends, the flock begins to gather near the gate, full-bellied and blinking slowly in post-snack days. One burps. You're not entirely sure how. Another curls up near the water's edge, preening in slow, satisfied movements. The handler herds them out gently. Good crew today, he says. No fights, no drama. You help close the gate, then look back at the field. It's quieter now. Cleaner. The snail clusters are gone. The weeds look timid. And the rice stands taller slightly maybe, but taller all the same. You didn't swing a tool, you didn't spray a thing, but you saw a problem solved, one snail at a time, one beak at a time. In this story, the ducks are both warriors and janitors. And somehow, in that strange balancing act, they've helped shape the history of farming, not through speeches or conquests, but by simply doing what they're best at. And tomorrow, they'll do it all over again. You're walking a narrow dirt path, now rising slightly above the rice fields and giving you a view of the entire valley. Shimmering water plots, dotted with ducks, smoke curling from kitchen chimneys, and distant mountains folded like old paper. The village is quieter than usual. Not because people aren't working, but because they're watching. Word has spread. A delegation from the county seat has arrived, and they're here to see the ducks. You sidle into a crowd of farmers gathered beneath a rickety canopy of woven reeds. Most are chewing pickled radish or sipping weak tea. All of them are whispering with the kind of hushed excitement reserved for harvest festivals or rare eclipses. A tall man in clean robes carrying a lacquered scroll case stands near the edge of the field, peering down with studied curiosity. The ducks are already at work, unaware, or more likely uninterested, that their audience includes a government official. One of the local elders sidles up next to you. He nods toward the visitor and mutters, "He's here to report back to the magistrate." They're debating whether duck farming should be recommended policy. You raise your eyebrows. Recommended? Mandated, even the elder says. Like planting mulberries or digging fish ponds, ducks might go imperial. You watch the official lean forward as a herder demonstrates a few command whistles. The flock pivots on cue, a synchronized arc of beaks and tail feathers slices through the shallows. Mainstream historical fact: in certain dynasties, especially under enlightened agricultural leadership, Chinese officials did send inspectors to evaluate innovative practices. If something improved yields or reduced labor, it could be written into regional farming guides or even promoted via state-sponsored scrolls. There are records of bamboo farming, terracing, and yes, duck-assisted agriculture being encouraged by local magistrates. But here's the twist. Historians still argue whether these policies were symbolic or practical. Did imperial China truly integrate these observations into statecraft, or were they more like polite nods to the wisdom of peasants? Scrolls are easy to issue. Changing farming habits across thousands of miles is another matter. The official turns, now questioning the handler about training time, flock sizes, feed cost. The handler answers calmly, if a bit smugly, You can't blame him. His ducks are on their best behavior. And yet not all officials were thrilled by the idea of duck-led farming. One Qing scholar referred to it dismissively as a lazy man's hoe. Others argued that while ducks improved yields, they undermined the virtues of discipline and toil. After all, how could a man learn resilience if his weeds were eaten by waddling birds instead of his own hands? Still, the proof is right here. In the field, healthy rice, few weeds, no back pain. What's not to love? Quirky tidbit of the day. In at least 2 recorded cases, officials did issue temporary duck edicts encouraging households to maintain a minimum number of ducks per mu, a traditional unit of land. One humorous anecdote tells of a village fined for underducking their paddy, though the record leaves out how enforcement actually worked. A duck census, a beak count, the elder beside you is still muttering. They'll try to write it into law. Mark my words, but they'll get it wrong. You look at him, wrong how? They'll say use ducks, but they won't say how. They'll forget the whistles, the timing, the care. Anyone can own a duck. Not everyone can work with one. That sentiment lingers with you as the delegation moves on, satisfied, or at least impressed. You trail behind the elder as he walks to the next paddy, where younger farmers are herding a newly trained flock. They want results, he says. They don't want the story. And that's the thing, isn't it? The ducks aren't just tools. They're the result of years, decades of observation, intuition, and trial. You can't mandate trust. You can't legislate a perfectly timed whistle. What works in one village might flop in another unless it's built on real understanding. You step down into the mud again and help guide the new flock. They're hesitant, uncertain of their space, but they learn fast. One stumbles through a shallow, pecking nervously. Another copies it. Within minutes, the group is gliding forward, confidence growing like a tide. You pause to scratch behind one duck's neck as it passes, and it gives you a brief, approving chirp. You've been accepted. Probably. By day's end, the official has departed, and the village exhales. The ducks are back in their pens, the field's quiet. But something has changed. There's pride in the air now. A glimmer of recognition that perhaps, just perhaps, this odd, muddy, feathery system might not stay so obscure for long. Still, the elder's warning echoes in your mind. Because this method, it's not just about results. It's about relationships between duck and rice, between farmer and flock, between knowledge and patience, and those aren't so easily copied. Night falls soft and slow over the village, wrapping the fields in a cool hush. The ducks have long since retreated to their pens, bellies full feathers, damp minds no doubt busy, dreaming of tomorrow's mollusks. But for the farmers, at least the younger ones, the day isn't quite over. You find yourself lingering near the communal kitchen, where the scent of garlic and soy lingers in the air. Nearby, a group has gathered around a low wooden bench. They're not cooking. They're talking, bragging more accurately about ducks. I swear, says one teenager leaning forward with a grin, mine recognized the smell of sedge before it even sprouted. A ripple of skeptical chuckles rolls through the group. Did it also recite poetry while it worked, another teases. The first waves a hand, mock all you want, but my flock cleared 3 paddies in less time than his did 2. He points across the firelight to another boy, who raises both hands in mock surrender. Sure, but only because mine were digesting snails twice their size. Can't work on a full stomach. You settle in at the edge, watching them exchange stories. It's part competition, part folklore, part small-town pride. Their ducks aren't just animals, they're team members, and the team that gets through the weeds faster wins bragging rights for the whole season. You chuckle softly. Farming, it seems, isn't all solemn labor and bent backs. Sometimes it's a sport. One girl chimes in with a story about her duck, White Feathers, Black Bill, that once herded other ducks. She'd snap her beak and they'd fall in line, she says, eyes shining. Even the drakes listen to her. Someone gasps dramatically. A duck general. She had presence, the girl says, utterly serious. Mainstream historical fact. Competition among farmers wasn't just for amusement. In many villages, seasonal festivals included animal showcases, pigs, oxen, and yes, even ducks. Farmers would parade their best trained birds, demonstrating commands, timing, and even formation walking. Some were awarded small tokens or titles. Others just earned bragging rights and a generous bowl of dumplings. And while official histories often skip over such details, oral traditions don't. These stories, like the Duck General, live on in kitchen corners and moonlit courtyards like this one passed down with pride. You sip a bowl of warm barley soup someone's handed you and listen as the conversation deepens. Someone tells of a duck that never learned to stop pecking at rice, but would follow its handler anywhere, even into the forest. Another recounts a tale about a duck that saved a child from a snake, though the details get hazier with each telling. Was it a cobra or a water snake? Was the duck large or just angry? No one agrees, but no one minds either. These are the stories that bind a community, not just the history in scrolls, but the silly, the strange, the suspiciously exaggerated. And here's your quirky tidbit of the night. In certain regions, farmers held mini duck derbies. Not for racing, but for obedience relays, where ducks had to follow a handler through obstacles around baskets, over shallow ditches, through narrow paddies. Points were awarded for speed, accuracy, and not trampling any rice. The prize, usually a live chicken or a string of dried persimmons. Humble but cherished. The fire crackles low as the group begins to disperse. One by one, the young farmers rise, stretch, and meander home, still chuckling, still arguing about whose duck could out-eat the others. The stars above blink through the haze, and the fields hum quietly under the moonlight. You walk slowly through the village past pens full of softly snoring ducks. Some have their heads tucked beneath their wings, others curled into soft, feathered bundles. A few still twitched, now and then caught in a dream chase, probably of weeds that got away. And just as you pass the last coop, you hear it, a soft, singular quack, almost like a question. You stop, glance back. One duck, barely visible, is awake, watching. You tilt your head. It quacks again, a little softer this time, then goes quiet. Historians still argue whether ducks form real attachments to handlers or simply associate them with food and safety. Some researchers claim they can recognize faces, even voices. Others say that's romanticizing. But standing there beneath the stars, with a duck watching you like a fellow night owl, it's hard not to believe something lingers in those beady little eyes. You whisper goodnight and continue down the path. Barley soup, warm in your belly. the scent of smoke in your hair. The village is still. The stories are still echoing. And somewhere in the dark, ducks are dreaming of weeds. You're up earlier than usual today, before the roosters, before the children, before even the ducks have started murmuring in their pens. The air is heavy with mist and dew, and for a moment the village feels suspended, as if time forgot to press play. You savor the quiet. Then you hear it, a sudden squawk, loud and indignant, followed by a splash and a panicked flurry of wings. You jolt upright and rush toward the noise-heart thudding. Something's wrong in the paddies. By the time you reach the edge of the field, the sun has started to stretch pale fingers across the hills, revealing a minor disaster. 3 young ducks have broken rank. They're stomping wildly through a section of rice seedlings, their feathers matted with mud, their expressions somewhere between frantic and gleeful. One is chasing a frog, another is digging at something invisible, the third is spinning in tight, wet circles like a wind-up toy winding down. The rice trampled, bent, uprooted in places. You wince. "Duck's gone rogue," mutters a tired voice behind you. It's the handler, same one from a few days ago, rubbing her eyes and tying her hair back. She surveys the chaos with the air of someone who has lived through worse. "Well, looks like we're doing this the hard way." Together you wade into the field to recover the escapees. It's not glamorous. There's squelching, slipping, one unintentional faceful of water. One duck dodges left the second right, and the third somehow doubles back and hides behind your legs, as if you're the cause of all this. Eventually, with careful steps and a few sharp whistles, you wrangle the trio back into the flock. The handler sighs, pats her pockets, finds no duck treats left, and mutters something that might be ancient farmer profanity. Not all ducks are prodigies, and today proves it. You look at the damaged rice row. The seedlings are muddy, flattened, some already browning. The handler shakes her head. It happens. That's the price. Mainstream historical fact. Rice duck integration, as effective as it is not flawless. Even well-trained ducks occasionally damage young plants, especially during early growth stages when rice is most vulnerable. That's why farmers historically released ducks after a certain number of days, post-transplanting, enough time for roots to anchor and stalks to strengthen. Jump the schedule, and you risk a field like this one. Historians still argue whether rogue duck behavior was seen as a manageable nuisance or a serious liability. Some manuals warn of impertinent flocks and recommend rotating pens often to keep them from growing too bold. Others insist that a handful of misbehaving ducks is a fair trade for acres of clean, snail-free paddies. You sigh and start repairing the damage, carefully pressing seedlings back into the mud, replanting a few from nearby spares. The handler joins you, grumbling but calm. They're young. They get excited. They don't know rice from a reed yet. You glance at the culprits who now sit innocently at the edge of the field, pretending they did nothing. One yawns. Quirky tidbit of the day. Some farmers used duck-shaped decoys during training to help direct attention. These were often carved from wood floated gently ahead of the flock, and sometimes dressed in miniature feather coats. A trick of flock instinct. If one duck appears to know what it's doing, the rest often follow. Even if it's a wooden duck, you suspect one of today's rogue trio might fall for that. Later, as the sun climbs and you rinse your hands at the well, the handler offers you a folded leaf with sticky rice and scallion tucked inside. You know, she says, between bites sometimes, I think the ducks just like to test us, like teenagers. You nod, and we're the parents. She grins, more like the janitors. You sit in the shade together, watching a fresh flock head out, guided this time by a more seasoned group of herders. They move like water, calm and smooth, their route hugging the rice rows like practiced dancers. No one's chasing frogs, no one's doing pirouettes. You almost forget the chaos of the morning until you feel something peck your foot. You look down. One of the rogue ducks is back, watching you, head tilted. You raise an eyebrow. It blinks, then waddles away like it had something better to do anyway. You shake your head. Do they ever grow out of it? The handler shrugs. Some. Others just learn to hide the mischief better. That night, as you jot down your notes by lantern light, you find yourself laughing at the absurdity of it all. Farming is supposed to be predictable. Timetables, cycles, yields. But ducks are the wild card. And somehow they're still essential, because in spite of the mishaps, the broken stalks, and the frog-chasing frenzies, the system still works. Not because it's perfect, but because it forgives. You've been in the village long enough now that people have stopped treating you like a visitor and started treating you like something more dangerous an audience. Tonight after dinner, someone calls you over with a sly smile and says, "You haven't heard the duck stories yet, have you?" Before you can answer, a stool is pulled up, a bowl of warm, sweet rice. Wine is placed in your hands, and you find yourself surrounded by a semicircle of villagers, old, young, somewhere in between, faces glowing in the firelight, eyes already glinting with mischief. This isn't about farming anymore. This is duck folklore. The first tale begins simply: a duck that refused to enter a certain field. Every time it approached, it stopped dead in its tracks, feathers bristling, eyes wide. The farmer tried everything, whistles, food, even dragging it, but the duck wouldn't budge. Later that season, lightning struck that field, during a sudden storm, frying the shallow water into steam and scaring the oxen half to death. The duck knew, the storyteller says gravely to general murmurs of approval. It felt something. You sip your wine. It tastes like ginger and dates and maybe a little superstition. Next comes the story of the duck with the split bill, born under a blood moon raised on the edge of the village. Never made a sound. Never followed the flock. But somehow it weeded faster than any other duck in the province. It didn't need commands, it just understood. A woman across the fire nods. Some say it was a reincarnated monk. Come back to atone. Now that escalated quickly. Mainstream historical fact. Chinese agrarian culture, especially in the South, often wove spiritual beliefs into daily practice. Ducks, like many animals that served humans directly, were sometimes considered omens or spiritual intermediaries. A duck refusing to enter a field might be seen as a warning. A duck laying eggs in an unusual spot could bring good fortune. And a particularly wise duck, possibly blessed or inhabited by a spirit. Historians still argue whether such stories were serious beliefs or simply colorful tradition. Some say they were ways to explain strange behavior in animals. Others believe they were teaching tools, metaphors disguised as duck tales. Either way, they endure. A younger farmer offers a more cheerful story: a duck that stole a farmer's shoe every morning and left it floating in the pond. The farmer was furious, until one day he found that pond teeming with baby eels, fertilizer gold. From that day forward, the duck got extra feed, and the farmer never wore shoes to the field again. The whole circle laughs. You do too. And then come the lucky feathers. You're told more than once that a single feather plucked from a duck that has weeded 1,000 rows brings fortune. Not just regular fortune, a boy insists. Marriage fortune. He says this with such confidence that his older sister throws a fishbone at him. Quirky tidbit for today. In certain regions of Yunnan rice, farmers would wear small duck feathers inside cloth amulets, especially during harvest festivals or before planting. It was believed the feather carried the strength, vigilance, and patience of the duck. Some even embroidered duck shapes into children's clothing to bless them with good feet. The fire crackles lower now and the crowd thins as yawns begin to spread. But one man stays older than the rest, face lined like a crumpled map. He waits until it's quiet before speaking. He tells you about the spirit duck. No name, no sound. Just a white shape that appears in the mist before harvest, never walks, just glides. If it passes your field and your rice stands tall, you'll have a bumper yield. But if it turns away, check for rot, he says simply. Check your soil. Check your soul. He offers no smile, no wink. Just sips his wine, nods once, and leaves you to the firelight and the frogs. You sit there for a long time, thinking about all the stories. The spirit duck, the reincarnated monk, the lucky feathers, the omen-filled fields, the stolen shoes. Part of you laughs, part of you wonders, and maybe that's the point, because farming is hard. It's muddy, unpredictable, slow. And when you live every day in the fields, watching water rise and weeds grow and pests return again and again, you need more than technique. You need stories. Stories to explain the unexplainable, to keep faith when the rains don't come, to believe there's meaning in the strange behavior of one duck out of 50. You stand brushing straw from your tunic and glance out across the darkened paddies. The moon hangs low, casting silver ripples across the still water. Somewhere out there, ducks sleep in tight circles, unaware of their mythical reputations. Or maybe not. You squint. Was that movement? Just missed. Right. Still, as you walk back towards your cot, you find yourself murmuring the words the old man said. Check your soil, check your soul, just in case. You awaken to a sky washed pale by heat, not a cloud in sight. The mist that usually drapes the fields like a silk scarf is gone, and the air feels brittle dry, almost tense, like the earth is holding its breath. The ducks know it too. You wander down to the edge of the paddies and notice it immediately. The water level is low, not dangerously low, not yet, but enough that the banks are crusting at the edges. The ground cracks faintly beneath your step, and the ducks, normally eager, chaotic, full of morning quacks, are strangely subdued. The lead handler approaches from the other direction, hat pulled low, her steps unhurried. Not much to do today, she says simply. Let them rest. You watch her open the pen gate anyway. The ducks emerge slowly, hesitantly, like workers on a mandatory shift they didn't sign up for. Some dip their beaks into the shallow water. Others look around as if trying to decide what this means for their breakfast schedule. You follow as they waddle toward the fields, their webbed feet kicking up dust where there should be puddles. Mainstream historical fact: traditional rice duck farming depends on carefully managed water levels. The paddies must be flooded enough to deter weeds and soften the soil, but not so deep that the ducks float helplessly or the rice roots suffocate. During droughts, this balance becomes difficult. Too little water, and neither ducks nor rice can thrive. Historians still argue whether ancient irrigation systems were advanced enough to save rice duck integration during bad years. Some point to elaborate water wheel systems and village-level water-sharing pacts. Others believe that drought years simply meant fewer ducks in the field, with farmers returning reluctantly to hand weeding and praying for rain. You kneel at the edge of one paddy and dip your fingers into the water. It's warm, too warm. You can almost hear the soil sighing. You wonder how often this happened in centuries past, when a whole system built on harmony between bird and plant and water began to fray because the sky refused to help. The ducks poke around half-heartedly. A few still manage to find snails clinging to the mud. One determined drake wrestles a weed from a dry patch and immediately gets into an argument about it with his neighbor. But mostly they're quiet, conserving energy, waiting. Back near the village, a meeting is taking place under the banyan tree. You drift closer and eavesdrop. "We can drain from the northern canal," one farmer says. "No use," another replies. The next village is already pulled from it. Their paddies are dry too. Someone suggests rationing the fields, watering one every 3 days instead of daily. It's met with hesitant nods. And then someone else says maybe it's time to cull the ducks. The silence that follows is loud. It's not said cruelly, it's practical. Fewer ducks mean less feed, less water, less stress on the already strained system, but it also means the end of a season's work, the breaking of bonds that run deeper than beak and bill. The head handler shakes her head slowly. "Not yet," she says. "Let's wait 3 more days. The sky might change." You glance upward. The sun glares down indifferent. Later that afternoon, you follow a small group of ducks who've wandered toward a shaded corner of the field where a trickle of water still runs through a drainage ditch. They settle there gratefully, heads resting on backs. Soft little snores vibrating through the air. You sit beside them. The quiet is comforting. Then one duck perks up, stands, tilts its head. A breeze passes through. It smells faintly, just faintly, of rain. You stand too suddenly hopeful. You sniff. Maybe you're imagining it, maybe not. Quirky tidbit of the day. In some villages, ducks were considered more accurate than roosters when it came to predicting weather. Farmers would watch their behavior if ducks bathed obsessively or walked in tight flocks. Before dawn, rain was believed to be on the way. One saying went, "If the duck walks early, the clouds come late. If it naps till noon, the sun stays cruel." You turn to look at your companion, the duck who stood up first. It waddles in a slow circle, sniffs the air, quacks once, then settles back down with a flop. You sigh. Still, you tell yourself it noticed something, or wanted to. Maybe that's enough. That evening, you help the farmers carry buckets from the communal well to splash into the driest paddies. It's not much, but it keeps the soil from cracking further. The ducks watch with interest, but don't interfere. They know this isn't their domain. After the last bucket is poured, you sit on the berm, watching the sky shift from orange to deep blue. The ducks lie quietly along the banks, feathers ruffling slightly in the rising wind. The stars come out slowly. 1, then 3, then 10. Still no rain, but no panic either. You realize something: this system ducks rice water people. It doesn't depend on constant perfection. It survives through adjustment, through patience, through waiting without wasting. Tomorrow may bring more heat, or maybe rain. Either way, the ducks will be here. So will the rice, and so will you. The rain arrives without ceremony. No thunder, no lightning, just a slow, rhythmic pattering in the pre-dawn, gray, soft drops, tapping on thatched roofs, slipping into dry cracks, collecting gently on the wide leaves of taro near the well. You sit up on your straw mat and smile before you're even fully awake. You step outside barefoot. The soil is already softening. Puddles return to the paths like long-lost friends. Somewhere nearby, a duck lets out a sleepy, approving honk. The entire village exhales. By the time the sun rises, the fields are waking too. Water is trickling back into dry paddies through hand-carved bamboo channels, bubbling over ridges and disappearing into the thirsty earth. Ducks waddle out one by one, testing the new terrain with cautious feet and curious beaks. Some flap excitedly. Others just float, eyes half closed, as if they've been waiting for this moment forever. You head down to the main paddy, trailing behind one of the mid-size flocks. These aren't the wild ducklings or the elderly weeders. These are the prime patrol, healthy, sharp, fully trained, and now freshly rested. And they are ready to work. As soon as their feet hit water, they snap into motion. No hesitation. Just a low murmur of quacks and the splash of perfectly timed strokes. One after another, they spread out like a tide, scanning every patch of greenery for intruders. The rain has brought with it a surge of growth. Weeds that had laid low during the dry spell are poking up again, emboldened by the return of moisture. But the ducks, newly motivated, maybe just showing off, are already on the attack. You pause to watch a tightly clustered group fan out across one muddy quadrant. They move like a cloud shadow. Every few seconds, a beak dips, a ripple spreads. A quack announces another victory. Mainstream historical fact. Water management was the backbone of rice farming in ancient China. From terraced mountain paddies to lowland canals, farmers designed entire ecosystems to control the flow height and cleanliness of water. Integrated duck farming made use of these same structures. Ducks didn't just float around at random, they followed the currents, the patterns, the gentle slopes farmers engineered by hand. Historians still argue whether duck behavior influenced those irrigation designs or merely adapted to them. Some believe water channels were widened in specific areas to allow duck resting spots. Others think ducks learned to follow existing human systems. Either way, the two bird and water move together like brushstroke and ink. You follow the lead duck through a stretch of field recently hit by weeds. It doesn't pause, it just tucks its head low and charges forward with almost military efficiency. Behind it, three others mimic the move, forming a perfect diamond formation. You can't help it. You whisper, "Good duck." The handler behind you smirks. They do like praise. Apparently, some farmers talk to their ducks every day, offering soft encouragement like teachers guiding a classroom. "Good eye. Careful there. Try again." It might sound silly, but the ducks respond. They turn, they listen, they trust. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some families gave their best ducks honorary titles. Not names exactly, but roles. One might be called General if it led the group consistently. Another Scholar if it was clever during training. A particularly bold female duck auntie. There's always an auntie. She bites the boys who get too rowdy. Today you get to meet one of those legends. At the far end of the main field, a small cluster of ducks is led by a single bird. larger than the others. Feather's darker steps slower but precise. The handler calls her Laoshi teacher. Laoshi doesn't race. She examines, she circles patches of reeds before diving. She tests new growth by nibbling, then walking away as if offering a verdict. The younger ducks follow close behind, mimicking her every move. She trained 2 flocks, the handler tells you. Just by doing her job, you watch as Laoshi pauses near a suspicious patch of grass, sniffs, pecks, then turns her head slightly. The ducks behind her veer off. The patch is left untouched. Must not be a threat. You're in awe, not of the duck alone, but of the system that shaped her. Because this isn't accidental, this is generational refinement. Every duck that learns makes the next duck smarter. Every field teaches its flock, and every season carries lessons forward. When the rains return, when the water flows again, it's not just a restart, it's a continuation. Later in the afternoon, the sky clears, and a soft breeze moves through the valley. The ducks, their work mostly done, begin to cluster near the bamboo shade shelters built into the berms. Some nap, others preen. A few peck playfully at each other, flapping lazily in the shallows. You sit at the edge with your feet in the water. It's warm again, but the fields are full. The rice stands tall, and the weeds are well being taken care of. The handler leans against a post nearby and says, "Not bad, right after all that." You nod. It's like the ducks knew the rain was coming. She shrugs. Maybe they did. Or maybe they just never gave up waiting for it. You watch the patties stretch out before you, each one a patch of careful balanced rice. Water, bird, mud, sky. The ducks, the humans, even the weeds. They're all part of something larger. Something that isn't about control, but about harmony. And harmony, as it turns out, waddles. You spend the next few days walking with a deeper sense of rhythm through the paddies, beside the pens, along the quiet village paths at dawn. Something has shifted in the way you see the landscape. It no longer feels like a patchwork of separate parts. People, ducks, rice. But one long, soft breath exhaled in steady, soggy harmony. But today you see something different, a visitor. Not a local official this time. Not a trader. Not a tax collector with red lacquered boots and a disapproving mustache. No, this man has a sunburned nose, a pack full of scrolls, and a translator trailing behind him who keeps tripping over irrigation ditches. He is foreign, definitely. You're told he's a Jesuit sent to map local farming customs and report back to his mission in Macau. He carries notebooks, a brass compass, and a face that constantly hovers between fascination and disbelief. He points a lot. Currently, he's pointing at ducks. He's not the first foreigner to find this strange. Mainstream historical fact, in the 16th and 17th centuries, Jesuit missionaries in China, men like Mateo Ricci and Juan Rodriguez, often marveled at Chinese agricultural practices. Many wrote detailed reports about the efficient use of space, the integration of aquaculture, and yes, the peculiar sight of ducks being used to weed rice paddies. These reports eventually reached Europe, where they were met with a mixture of awe and confusion. You stand beside the Jesuit now, listening as he murmurs in Portuguese, points to a duck, mid-peck, and looks utterly flabbergasted. The translator stammers. He asks, "If the ducks know not to eat the rice?" You nod. They're trained. The Jesuit laughs, like you've just said, "Ducks recite poetry." Then he writes something down furiously. The local farmers don't seem particularly fazed. They've seen visitors gawk before. One woman offers the foreigner a boiled duck egg, which he accepts nervously, then holds like it might explode. You guide them along the berm. The translator slips again. The Jesuit ducks pun unintended as a feathered blur passes underfoot. He's sweating, red-faced, but utterly fascinated. You point out the flocks. That group there, you explain, is about 5 months old. They'll weed 3 fields a day. He blinks. Only ducks? No laborers? Only ducks. You can practically hear his worldview cracking like an old egg. He asks to see a training session. You bring him to the pen. He watches the ducklings wobble through basic drills, turning, stopping, pecking at decoys. He tries to command one himself. It ignores him entirely. He laughs again, shakes his head, and writes more notes. Quirky tidbit, one 17th century Jesuit journal refers to rice duck farming as the most efficient form of madness. Another described it as a symphony of peasants and poultry, the likes of which no French field has ever seen. Ducks as farm hands simply didn't compute in European agronomy at the time. Back home, pest control involved traps ash or prayer. Ducks. That was sorcery. You watch the Jesuit sketch a diagram water channels, rows of rice dots labeled potto duck. He's trying to understand, trying to capture not just what's happening, but why it works. You want to tell him it's not a trick, it's not magic, it's patience. It's observation passed from grandmother to grandson, from one muddy sandal to another. It's teaching ducks to listen and teaching people to listen to ducks. But instead, you just say it's normal here. And maybe that's the hardest thing to translate. As the sun sets, the Jesuit sits beneath the banyan tree, utterly exhausted, shirt, damp hat, drooping. The translator lies face down nearby, mumbling something about leeches. The ducks, meanwhile, are content. They paddle in evening light, unconcerned by the clumsy observers at their periphery. You pass the elder, who first taught you the whistle commands. He nods toward the visitors. Do they understand? You shrug. They're trying. He grins. Ducks don't care what language you speak, only how steady your hand is. Later, as the Jesuit leaves, he bows slightly and thanks the village. Then he stops, looks at the nearest duck, small, sleepy-eyed, sitting in a puddle of moonlight, and says, "Obrigado, Señor Pato." Thank you, Mr. Duck. The duck does not respond, but you feel the moment land anyway. Centuries from now, his notes will survive in some library. Scholars will puzzle over them. Ducks that weed, they'll say. Surely an exaggeration, but you'll know better because you saw it. Heard the whistles, felt the mud, watched the weed pulled not by hand or blade, but beak, and maybe that's all that matters. You wake to the sound of cartwheels, bumping over stones, a rhythmic creak, thud, as something heavy makes its way through the village gate. You peer out and see a man leading an ox-drawn cart piled high with bundles of seedling trays, a large straw hat tilted low to hide his face. He's not from around here. Behind him trail 2 younger helpers and a crate of ducks. Not the same breed, you note. Taller, leaner feathers, more upright and shiny. Their bills are longer. They honk more than quack. And they look confused, like foreign tourists who just realized they've ordered the wrong soup. You're told they're from the south, Hainan maybe. The farmer bought them after reading about duck rice farming in a newspaper clipping his cousin sent from Guangdong. He's here to learn. You're ushered over to translate. Somehow word has gotten around that you understand ducks. The man's eager, excitable, full of questions. How deep is the water? How old should they be when they start? Do you train them with bells or drums? He's scribbling as you speak, duckling feathers stuck to his sleeve. ink smudged on his palm. Mainstream historical fact. By the late 20th century, after years of chemical dependence, rice duck farming began to see a revival, not just in China but abroad. In Japan, the Philippines, Indonesia, and even pockets of California, small-scale farmers started reintroducing ducks as a low-tech, high-reward solution to weed and pest problems. This wasn't nostalgia. It was innovation rediscovered. You walk him through a demo with the locals, the ducks are released, follow commands, do their rounds like professionals. The southern birds, not so much. One immediately jumps a berm, another tries to hide under a basket. The third stares into the water like it's looking for Atlantis. The visitor laughs sheepish. They're not used to teamwork. You nod. They will be. He watches the older flock eyes, full of longing. I thought this was just a story. Ducks that weed rice. I didn't know it was real. You hand him a training whistle. It's real, but it's not quick. And that's the thing he and so many others must understand. Rice duck farming isn't just about throwing birds into water. It's rhythm, relationship, time. Some modern farmers try to automate it. Attach tiny trackers to ducks. Measure their steps, their pecks, even their droppings. Some build duck bots, small machines that paddle and stir the water to mimic movement. Quirky tidbit of the day. A university project in Kyoto once tested mechanical ducks outfitted with rotating paddles and pest sensors. The verdict: effective at churning the soil, but not at making decisions. A real duck knows the difference between rice and sedge. A robot does not. And when something unexpected appears, like a frog or a broken berm or a curious child, it's not the robot that adapts. It's the duck. Historians still argue whether modern science will ever match the subtlety of this ancient system. Some believe drones and AI could replace ducks within decades. Others insist that no algorithm, no matter how advanced, can replicate a duck's instinct. A duck makes 1,000 tiny decisions every hour based on smell, texture, temperature, even mood. Good luck teaching that to metal. You watch as the visitor's ducks finally venture out into a training pen. One slips. Another tries to eat a rock. But the third dips. Its beak pecks a weed and stands proudly. He gasps, "Did you see?" You smile, first of many. By dusk, the man has stayed longer than he meant to. He scribbled down pages of notes, swapped stories with the elders, even offered to buy one of their old ducks for training. They refuse politely, but firmly. She's family, someone says, patting the duck like an aging grandmother. You escort him to the edge of the village as he loads his cart. Come back next season, you tell him. They'll be smarter by then. He laughs, nods, and climbs up onto the seat. The ox snorts. The wheels creak, and the cart begins its slow journey down the winding road. In the back, one of the ducks lets out a triumphant honk. You stand there for a long while, watching them disappear into the trees. Then you turn back toward the fields, where your own flocks are winding down for the night, standing tall in clean paddies, with just the slightest ripple of pride in their wake. The ducks are not gone. They are spreading, not as novelty, not as folklore, but as future. The sun hangs low now, amber light caught on the paddies like gold leaf brushed over water. The days are shorter, the air crisper. Autumn is whispering at the door, and the ducks, those tireless web-footed field hands, know it. They're slower in the mornings now, less frenzied in their feeding. The weeds are fewer. The snails have burrowed deeper. Their job, for the most part, is done. You walk the berms with a strange feeling in your chest. It's not quite sadness, but something close a quiet nostalgia for something that hasn't ended yet but soon will. And then without fanfare, you start to notice the signs of change. One morning, a duck pen is empty, not abandoned, just not filled. The herder tells you the flock has been retired. Not in the euphemistic way, really retired. They'll live out their days by the lotus pond, behind the granary, eating gently, waddling freely. No more drills, no more weeds. Just clean water and quiet shade. You visit them later, and it's true, they look content, soft, unbothered. One is floating upside down feet, wiggling slightly in the air. You blink. Is that asleep, the elder says. Deep sleeper, that one. You sit by the pond, feeding a few of the older birds. Handfuls of chopped greens. They come to you slowly, pecking without urgency. Some of them you realize you recognize from your first weeks here. Laoshi, the teacher. Auntie, the enforcer. Even Waddles, the wild card. They're out of uniform now, but you remember them. Mainstream historical fact. As agriculture industrialized in the 20th century, rice duck farming nearly disappeared. With the rise of chemical herbicides and mechanized weeding, ducks were deemed inefficient too, unpredictable, too slow. Many villages that once prided themselves on their flocks let them go. Fields fell silent. The paddies became lonely, and with them something subtle vanished. Not just the ducks, but the rhythm. The walking, the whistling, the way children learn to mimic their grandparents by copying duck calls with reed flutes. The way stories used to end with, "And then the duck fixed it." Historians still argue whether this loss was necessary. Some say the Green Revolution made duck farming obsolete. Others argue it was never about efficiency alone. That in cutting ducks out of the system, we didn't just lose a method, we lost a kind of wisdom. Quiet, messy, feathery, but deeply tuned to the land. The good news, it's coming back. Slowly, tiny farms, sustainability researchers, curious farmers from abroad. Some see rice duck farming as a quirky footnote. Others see it as survival. You're told that a small group of younger villagers is planning to restart duck training for next season, using a combination of old whistles and new timing charts printed from someone's phone. The ducks, of course, don't care where the schedule comes from. They just want snacks and shallow water. You smile, because this isn't nostalgia for the sake of it. It's a revival. Quirky tidbit. In Taiwan, one eco-village offers duck therapy, letting guests wade through the paddies beside working flocks. No phones, no shoes, just cool mud birds and the distant sound of a bamboo flute. One guest was reported to have cried not out of sadness, but out of sudden, overwhelming peace. You kind of get it. Back in the main paddies, the fields are almost ready for harvest. The rice is heavy now, golden heads bowing toward the water, as if paying thanks. The ducks no longer need to work. Their presence alone is enough. You pass one final patrol, just 4 ducks, walking the narrow berm, barely glancing at the weeds. They move more like monks than farmers now. Calm, gentle, observing, not interfering. You think of the entire arc you've walked since your first step into the muck. The whistles, the rogue duck, incidents, the snail invasions, the debates about imperial policy, the foreigners' bewildered questions. And now you see a system that once nearly died but didn't. It just rested, like the ducks at the pond, like the soil after harvest, like a rhythm waiting for the next beat. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the glimmering fields, A soft breeze rises. One of the ducks near you tilts its head. It doesn't move. It doesn't quack. It just listens. You do too. Evening has fallen like a silk veil over the valley, and for the first time in weeks, the paddies lie still. No whistles, no ripples, just the long hush of a season come to rest. You find yourself walking alone along the outermost berm, the one that curves like a gentle arm around the village. The water has lowered slightly in the fields, just enough to expose the tips of last season's work. The rice stands tall, golden, and bowed, ready for harvest. And the ducks are watching from their pens, sleepy-eyed, full-bellied at ease. It feels like the right time to say goodbye. Not forever, maybe, but for now. You kneel by the edge of a paddy hand resting on a flat stone that's been smoothed by generations of similar pauses. You listen to the frogs, the distant clang of a cooking pot, the faint rustle of birds settling in the reeds, and then soft and low a single quack. You glance over your shoulder. One duck is out, sitting just behind you, chest puffed, neck stretched, head cocked, like it's trying to remember something. It waddles over slow and deliberate. You don't move. It sits beside you. No big moment, no grand farewell, just two creatures looking out over a job well done. Mainstream historical fact in modern ecological studies, the rice duck system has been hailed as a closed-loop model of sustainability. The ducks eat pests and weeds. They fertilize the soil naturally. The rice benefits. The water stays clean. And the farmer's workload becomes something closer to a partnership than a battle. This practice isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a blueprint for coexistence, for learning, for listening to rhythms older than language. Historians still argue whether it was genius or accident, whether some ancient farmer had a stroke of brilliance, or whether the ducks taught humans first. You smile. Maybe that's the truth behind all of this. We think we're training the ducks, but maybe the ducks were training us. You rise, brushing dirt from your knees. The duck beside you follows. Together you walk the path back toward the village, past the old training pen where new ducklings now sleep, past the bamboo gate where someone's already hanging next season's rope, past the cart path where a stranger might one day arrive with questions and leave with stories. You pause before stepping onto the porch of your small hut, looking once more over the paddies. The stars are coming out now, pricking holes in the navy sky. The moon casts a pale shimmer across the still water. And somewhere just faintly, you hear another quack, a distant reply. Quirky tidbit of the day. There's a saying in the hills, when the ducks sleep easy, the harvest will be kind. You like that one. You think it's probably true. You lie down the night wrapping around you like a blanket. The last thing you hear before sleep overtakes you is the soft, steady hum of frogs and crickets and a single satisfied duck snore. Not everything ancient is gone. Not everything simple is foolish. And sometimes the path forward waddles. Now just lie back a little deeper. Let your shoulders sink. Let your breath slow. Picture the fields again, empty, gentle, floating in moonlight. The paddies still shimmer from the last day's work, their surfaces smooth, reflecting stars like a great watery mirror. Ducks sleep in tidy bundles near the bank's beaks, tucked under wings, their work done, their dreams quiet. The village is silent now. A faint breeze rustles the bamboo roofs. Someone stirs briefly in their sleep, adjusts a blanket, turns softly on a woven mat. You are safe here, not just in body, but in memory. You've walked through days of rain and sun, Through ancient techniques and clumsy accidents, through laughter, history, and the occasional well-timed peck on the ankle. The fields will be waiting tomorrow, but tonight everything rests. The ducks dream of snails. The rice sways gently in its sleep, and you, floating just above the edge of waking, carry with you the soft rhythm of this place, a life lived close to the earth, close to water, close to the quiet genius of the natural world. Let the final images drift. A duck's trail across glassy water, a whistle in the mist, the soft, perfect hush of nothing urgent left to do. Sleep now. You've walked far enough.